male patient with uncontrolled or poorly controlled type 2 diabetes mellitus would present to us in the emergency department of casualty with history of cough with expectoration for the past 1 month, fever which was intermittent for the past 1 month, and loss of weight and appetite for the past 15 days. On examination, at the time of presentation, patient substrate was around 97 per minute, BP of around 130 per 80 millimeter mercury, and SpO2 and room air of around 93% with tachypnea, that is respirated of around 26 per minute. On auscultation, blood stones were diminished intensity, particularly on the right side, infraclavicular and infrascapular areas. So, investigations, when we investigated this case, there was leukocytosis with neutrophilic predominance. His RBS was terrible, more than 500 milligram per DL, and there was also associated with dyslipidemia with hyponatremia and hyperkalemia. So this was the X-ray that was taken at the time of presentation, maybe the next day of presentation. You could see that right lung is totally distorted lung. You could see there is a large, huge cavity almost occupying more than 70% of the lung. Hardly I could see the area that is close to the right hemidiaphragm, and in the area that is close to the hilum, you could see this large cavity. The same way we did a CT for that patient, you could see how the right lung is totally distorted. Hardly surrounded by a lot of air and with a fluid level. So with this, presentation, so what are the differential diagnoses that maybe such a good presentation for the past 1 month. So any patient with a cavitary lung disease in here, what are the common things that we should see? Pulmonary tuberculosis is the first thing that we should, think of, but this cavity is literally very large. So almost whole of the lung is involved. So maybe this is very rare because normally in pulmonary disease, 3 to 4 cavity is common. In necrotizing pneumonia, melioidosis, and invasive fungal pneumonia. Invasive fungal pneumonia may be in the form of invasive aspergillosis or in form of invasive mucormycosis. Both can present like a cavitary lung disease. Others like nocardiosis and thoracic actinomycosis, we kept as a DD for this case. So what happened next? So typically on the third day of admission, the patient complained of thick lump, that's a thick sputum, which was almost brownish and dirty black in color. So we sent a ball with KOH typically telling the microbiologist to look for any fungus. So, and we also did a transbronchial biopsy for this case, which showed the fungal elements with a broad aseptic. You could see the fungi, and you see that this fungi is broad. It's not a thin slender fungi. It's broad, and you could see the branch hyphae is exactly at right angles, which is very, very typical of mucor. Okay, let's go to the topic of today's session, that is the mucormycosis. The term mucormycosis is used to describe a spectrum of chronic, acute or subacute and frequently rapid progressing infections that is caused by the fungi of mucorales, but is the order of Zygomyces. Mucormycosis is an emerging invasive fungal infection with a high degree of mortality rate caused by ubiquitous fungal filamental fungi. This word is important. The mucormycosis is not a new disease. That's what already I described. It's not because of anything. This fungi is already there in the environment. So only those people who are at risk factors. So these patients this mucormycosis. Clearly? Can you hear me clearly, Jahangir?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's clear, sir. You're clear, sir. But somebody has is not muted their phone, so probably that's where the disturbance is from.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We are able to hear you.
Jahangir?
Sir, we are able to hear you. We are able to hear you.
One second.
We are able to hear you, sir.
But now it is clear?
Sir, kindly mute other participants.
Just see, if it is clear.
Yes, sir. All the other participants, kindly mute when you join.
Jahangir?
Yes, sir. I'm able to hear you, sir. We are able to hear you.
Okay, I'll proceed. Okay, the disease is characterized by extensive necrotizing vasculitis, which results in the thrombosis and subsequent tissue infarction. The prognosis remains poor, with the overall mortality estimated between 32 to 70%. What are the common agents which can lead to mucormycosis? I think these two agents are very common. Rhizopus species constitutes around 34%, mucus species constitutes about 19%, and Leishmania species, which were the more common identified mucus species which can lead to mucormycosis in Europe. But as far as in India, the data concerned, Rhizopus species is very common, which can lead to mucormycosis. So you can ask one question that the seasons where in which the mucormycosis is common. Seasonal variation is the most infections occurring from August to November, as per the data. In developed countries, it's more common in patients with immunocompromised, most particularly those patients with hematological malignancies. In contrast, developing countries in India, mucormycosis is very common in uncontrolled diabetes or poorly controlled diabetes, as already described, and also in post-traumatic patients. What are the different clinical forms of mucormycosis that we are seeing in practice? The most common and terrible form is rhinocerebral-orbital mucormycosis, and pulmonary mucormycosis, which involves the lungs, disseminated mucormycosis, and I think everyone can mute the mic. Yeah. All the participants, I think I request all the participants.
Sir, actually you can mute them, sir. As a host, you can mute them, sir.
You can mute, yes.
Only the host can mute others.
Yeah.
So you can mute them, sir. There's a lot of disturbance from some background. Not from you, sir, from the other participants. So you can mute them, sir.
Yes, I have. Yes. Okay, so it can present as rhinocerebral or pulmonary mucormycosis or disseminated form, which is very, very difficult to manage. Cutaneous or soft tissue mucormycosis, which is a localized presentation. If you do a proper surgical repairment, you can save the patient. Gastrointestinal, other uncommon renal mucormycosis is very, very rare. So there are these two common presentations that we see in immunocompromised post or the rhinocerebral mucormycosis and pulmonary mucormycosis. So where is the source of infection? So as I already described, these organisms are ubiquitous in nature, as they can be found in any decaying organic substance and soil, including but not limited to any breads or fruits, decayed material, vegetable matter, soil, compost piles, animal excreta. So everywhere these organisms are there. Mucoids, what we classically tell is that they are the rapidly growing fungi. They are releasing large number of airborne spores. Humans are exposed to these spores on daily basis, but intact immune system does not allow you to develop a serious infection. This point is very important. Even though these fungal spores are everywhere in the environment, not everyone will develop a serious disease on exposure to this mucor. So then who will develop? These are the important predisposing factors we need to consider before diagnosing a patient with mucormycosis. So as we are facing a terrible pandemic, second wave of COVID pandemic, any patient with a concurrent or recent less than 6 weeks of treated severe COVID patients, all these patients, if they present with the correct clinical scenario, we should always suspect a mucormycosis. Any patient with poorly controlled diabetes mellitus, especially those who are presenting with high sugar level at the time of presentation or with the presence of diabetic ketoacidosis, or any patient with use of immunosuppression by steroids or any dose of steroids which is used for more than 3 weeks long duration, or high dose of steroids which is used for more than 1 week. That's why we need to meticulously use the steroids. We should not do a over-counter medications, allow the patient to get a over-counter medication of steroids. You should not use enormous dose of steroids, or you should not give a prolonged dose of steroids. All the situations are terribly, terribly affect the patient's illness. And use of tocilizumab and other immunomodulators and other therapies, like we are using nowadays JAK inhibitors also. Baricitinib, which was recently approved and it is available in the market. And I could see some of the prescriptions, those patients who are maintaining saturation of 92 and above in the post-inflammatory phase also, I could see some of the prescriptions, the baricitinib, steroids, which is detrimental to the patient, which is not of use in many other patients, which can increase or which can make the patient prone to this type of infection. And use of contaminated adhesive bandages, wooden tongue depressors, adjacent building construction, hospital lines, these also is one of the important source of the patients to develop invasive mucormycosis. Any patient with prolonged neutropenia, or any patient with underlying malignancies, or patients who are admitted with history of burns or trauma or IV drug abuses, or any patient with history of renal failure and diarrhea and malnutrition, especially in low birth weight infants. And as I already told you, any patient, any immunocompromised host, either in the form of steroids or in the form of CTD-induced immunocompromised host, or HIV, or in patients CKD, or polyclonal diabetes, all these patients are at risk of developing invasive fungal infection. This point is very important. Any patient with iron overload, these patients are more prone to develop mucormycosis. There is a complex mechanism for that. I will describe that in a subsequent slides. So any patients with renal failure who are receiving iron, at the same time, any patients who are getting iron chelators like desferoxamine, so these patients are also at the risk of developing mucormycosis. Although rare, there are some sporadic case reports, as I already described, pulmonary mucormycosis associated with the HIV patients. So this point, I just want to stress, there are many people who are aggressively using or who are using empirical therapies, empirical antimicrobial therapies, even the antibiotics or broad spectrum antifungals. I think this will worsen the scenario. This will increase the risk of mucormycosis. So particularly prophylactic itraconazole or voriconazole for the patient's aspergillosis, or there are independent risk factors for development of invasive mucormycosis. So that's why when you are using these agents to any patient with suspect aspergillosis or mucor, you be very careful because this can only aggravate the scenario of developing invasive mucormycosis. So this is an important paper. So as I already described, the mucormycosis develops only in immunocompromised host. Commonly, what we see post-COVID patients. Common scenario what we see in the poorly controlled diabetes mellitus. But there is a situation that definitely even an immunocompetent host also can develop mucormycosis. But as per the reports, this immunocompetent host will develop less serious disease. These patients will have a more localized form of involvement, as this paper denoted that it is a localized cutaneous mucormycosis that requires only wide surgical debridement. So coming on to a present scenario, what is the importance of discussion here? What is COVID and mucor? Why is this so important nowadays? Since the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, there have been multiple reports across the country of various high incidence of mucormycosis among the patients with COVID-19, especially in those who are diabetic and those who are receiving steroids. So this I was focusing on the first day of COVID pandemic, but it was not famous at the time. But nowadays in media and everywhere, they are just discussing this issue. Because, and moreover, we are seeing more number of cases. We started seeing more number of cases of mucor associated with post-COVID scenario. So we call it as a CAM, that is COVID-associated mucormycosis, which has been associated with a high morbidity and mortality, exorbitant treatment cost, and leads to the shortage of antifungals. That's very important. This is the point that Dr. Janveer initially actually focused on. There is a shortage of antifungal drugs because of inadvertent or overuse of this mucor, because we didn't expect this pandemic will affect in a very bad way in India. So when and how to suspect CAM? Any patient with COVID-19 illness, either active case or recovering or post-discharge patient. So what are the points we need to note in the patient to suspect rhino-orbitocerebral mucormycosis? Initially, they may present with a nasal blockade or nasal congestion. Typically, with a nasal discharge, the discharge may be bloody, brown or blackish, along with the thrust or stress. They may be affected with the local pain initially, but after a period of time, the pain disappears. They may present with a diffuse pain and swelling, and sometimes they may have a numbness. It's one of the dangerous signs. There is a localized numbness will be in the area. They may present a headache and orbital pain, or they may present a toothache, loosening of maxillary and jaw involvement. There may be orbital involvement that can lead to the blurring or double vision of the pain, paresthesia that already described, fever, inflammation and thrombosis and necrosis. Sometimes this rhino-orbitocerebral mucormycosis directly involves the cavernous sinus, and you can see all the features of cavernous sinus thrombosis. Along with that, the signs of intracranial nerve palsy. Particularly the commonest nerves is number 2 to number 6. These are the common cranial nerves that may be involved in invasive cerebral mucormycosis. So next, how to suspect this pulmonary mucormycosis? So any patient with a fever, cough, with chest pain, pleural eruption, pneumostasis, worsening symptoms, it will suspect. But this is the common symptom you see in any patients. But you know what is a very typical of mucormycosis, that this patient worsen very rapidly, and it's totally unpredictable, and sputum color is very typical. It's like necrotic material. The sputum will be brownish to black in color, and this was the classical description usually given by the patient with pulmonary mucormycosis. Often a lung CT is confused with the COVID-related shadows. Suspect mucormycosis when you see a thick walled lung cavity, because cavitary lung disease in COVID is extremely very rare. So when you see a cavity in COVID patients, always you need to differentiate whether it is an invasive pulmonary fungal infections. There are two common invasive fungal infections that we see in day-to-day practice is invasive pulmonary acidosis and invasive pulmonary mucormycosis. Other signs like reverse halo sign, multiple nodules and all can help you to detect them. And one of the most common serological investigations that we ask for the patient invasive pulmonary acidosis is that, or invasive fungal infections, we ask for a serological investigation of galactomannan, serum galactomannan or beta glucan test, B-glucan test. And these tests are often negative in patient with mucormycosis. These tests are somewhat diagnostic for invasive aspergillosis and not for mucormycosis. Sometimes in mixed infection where you may see both the fungal infections like mucor and aspergillus in the same patient. In that group of patients, you may get a positive serological test. How to diagnose mucormycosis? For any patient, definitely imaging can give you an immediate clue. So when you suspect a rhinocerebral mucormycosis, get an ENT consult and you can do MRI TNS, brain contrast study for ROCM or plain CT thorax for mucormycosis. What are other things? You could see the whole sinus is completely obliterated, necrotic tissue, there is erosion of bone, there is, it is locally eroding, it is locally aggressive lesion, like it can just erode the local structures and it will resemble like a haphazard mass. So definitely you should ask for an ENT surgeon opinion if you suspect this ROCM for endoscopic collection of debris, particularly for invasive pulmonary acidosis, as the name indicates, it's invasive. It may be tissue invasive or angio-invasive. For diagnosis, it is not enough to get a collection of the secretions. It is enough to get a tissue. It is enough to get the necrotic tissue. You need to take a biopsy of the particular area wherever you are seeing, and one portion of the sterile saline for microscopy, another portion in formalin for diagnosis in a pathology site, histopathology. So for pulmonary mucormycosis, what are the samples you can take? You can send a sputum, you can send ball, you can send mini ball, non-bronchoscopic lavage, and you can do a transbronchial biopsy, either bronchoscopic, you can do a CT-guided biopsy. Sometimes these patients are very sick. It's very difficult to do a bronchoscopy also in this group of patients. So in that scenario, you can just do an image-guided biopsy. If the patient is so hypoxemic, they can't tolerate the procedure, you can do image-guided biopsy and you can send the patient for the sampling. As I already described that there are some signs which are very difficult. When you see a thick walled cavity in any patient with a COVID-19 pneumonia or any patient with a reverse halo sign or multiple nodules with haphazard pleural effusion and all these things, so you should suspect mucormycosis. And most important thing, when you suspect invasive aspergillosis, invasive fungal infections, if you get repeated negative galactomannan and beta-glucan test, definitely we may have a suspicion that this patient may have a pulmonary mucormycosis or mucormycosis, because these two tests are very specific for aspergillus and not for mucor. So let's discuss the mycology. The mucorales are the molds, the rapidly growing fungus everywhere in the environment. They grow rapidly within 2 to 5 days on the culture media. As you see, it's a fluffy gray or brownish colonies, a black pepper-like colonies. Actually, we can call it as a lid lifters. If you put a culture for this fungus, if you put a lid, it will immediately grow and lift the lid out. You could see that. So this is a classical description for the growth pattern for mucor. So what is little bit of pathogenesis? The innate immune mechanism to mucormycosis supplied by mononuclear and polymorphonuclear phagocytes. Only by overcoming these mechanisms, the spores can germinate into hyphal forms and ultimately lead to the angioinvasive form of infection. While most spores can reach the distal alveolar space due to the size, larger spores greater than 10 microns may lodge in nasal termites, potentially causing isolated sinusitis. Even immunocompetent hosts can develop slowly progressive pulmonary when exposed to a relation of high spore inoculum. You could see the fungus here. And other pathogenic mechanism, you could see the defects in the phagocytic cell activity, inherent resistance to killing by the human phagocytes, and iron metabolism. I told you that the patients who are iron overload and patients who use the iron chelators, they have a central role in the pathogens of mucormycosis. Desferoxamine abolishes the fungistatic effect of serum and increases the in vitro fungal growth. The hallmark of mucormycosis is that extensive angioinvasion with resultant vascular thrombosis and tissue necrosis, which is the hallmark. Elevated glucose and iron levels upregulate the GRP78 expression, and this leads to the damage of human endothelial cells to the fungus. So these two are important. When you have a high iron level, when you have the elevated glucose level, this will upregulate this GRP78. This will lead to the damage of the endothelial cells, that particularly vascular endothelial cells.
పర్సనల్ ఎక్స్పీరియన్స్ చెప్పు. ఏం జరిగిందని మా ఊర్లో నెల్లూరు సిస్టర్ ఉంది ఒక ఆమె ఈ రోజు వచ్చింది నెల్లూరు అంట షారోన్ సిస్టర్ షారోన్ చెప్తాను నేను ఇట్లా
Okay, and what are the common clinical features? So we describe more common that rhinocerebral and pulmonary. What are the other forms? Like as I described, rhinocerebral mucormycosis, how they will present? They may present with nasal stiffness, they may present with a false pulse, epistaxis, crusty nasal discharge, unilateral facial edema, diplopia or proptosis, pain and redness of the eyes, loss of vision, restriction of eye movements, palatal masses or ulcers, blackish discoloration over the bridge of nose or palate, any history of prolonged fever with headache, loosening of toothache, and jaw difficulty in opening the jaw and altered mental status. All these patients in the post-COVID scenario or after the recovery also, you should suspect this rhinocerebral mucormycosis. Today's soft tissue, definitely erythema induration, then black eschar formation at the site of involvement. Pulmonary mucormycosis, refractory fever on broad spectrum antibiotics, non-productive cough, maybe a productive cough with a blackish sputum or brownish sputum, and progressive dyspnea and pleuritic chest pain. Gastrointestinal mucormycosis, fever, bleeding per annum, mass per lesions, mucormycosis joints, and other things are extremely rare. So you could see how this rhinocerebral, you could see this patient, you could see there is a unilateral swelling around the eyes, okay, around the left eye. You could see the extensive conjunctival chemosis. You could see the conjunctival edema, edema, and this patient have, diagnosed of mucormycosis. This is once again other patients in ICU. You could see the typical late stage. You could see the black eschar formation on the bridge of nose, and completely the patient can't able to open the eyes, and you could see there is extensive involvement of the right side of face with typical eschar formation. And X-ray, what I described. This is the initial X-ray of one patient. After that, you could see there is a airflow level. Here, this is what the X-ray that we described initially. That is a completely distorted lung with the airflow level. These are some CT findings which are typical. This is not reverse allocyne is not only specific for this mucor. You may get this reverse allocyne in many conditions. You may get in case of cryptogenic aromatic pneumonia. You may get in any conditions. But what is more classical of reverse allocyne that you see in mucor is that you see there's a thick-walled reversal. Inside that you see the granularity, you see the septa. As you see here, subtle reticulation in the center, you could see in most of the patients. And this is an imaging study. You could see that's an involvement of bone, erosion of bone. There's a mass-like appearance in the retroorbital area, and you could see the whole sinus is filled with the fluffy necrotic material. And what are the tests you do when you collect the sample? You can do a staining with Brocaud-Gomari staining, Calciflow staining, and what you see typically is a broad septotype with branches at the right angles. What's the difference between the Aspergillus and mucor? This is a simple difference. Aspergillus is a thin, slender fungi which branches at acute angles. Okay, whereas mucor is a broad fungi, and this fungi is aseptic most of the times and branch at the right angles. So what is the histopathological finding? You see that this classically the fungi is broad. You could not see any lines in that. You could not see the septa, and you could see the branch arise exactly at the right angles. And one more typical thing is they have a short buds like thing. So this time, because these fungi are extremely fragile. When you do a KOH mount or anything, when you do that, what will happen? They do the centrifugation. So this fungi is fragile and it will burn out and it can just resemble like this. It will break off. So they will have a like short stud-like appearance, and this fungi can be easily identified when the microbiologist suspect clinically when the patient is having mucormycosis. And trauma infarction and angioinvasion can be described in the histopathology evaluation, and also perineural invasion also can be described. Other methods, molecular methods like PCR, are very rarely done nowadays. There are antigen detection methods are there, but as I already described that these 2 points, galactomannan, beta-D-glucan, if negative, likely invasive mucormycosis than invasive pulmonary, because these two tests are typically seen in case of invasive pulmonary aspergillosis. The other lab parameters, what you do? You do a CBC to see the prolonged neutropenia, you do ESR, you do a FPS, fasting blood sugar level to see the sugar, how far the sugar is controlled, you see the HbA1c level, And what you do? Any suspect the rhinocerebral, do a nasal, ask for a nasal endoscopy, crusting, debris, scabbing, and granulation, disturbed mucosa, decreased bleeding ingestive mucosa, or you can take a sample from that, and you can ask for imaging, CCT, nose and PNS. You can see the erosion, thinning of bones. You can see enlargement of masticatory muscle. Mucosa thickening, very classically seen. And you can ask for a MRI brain also to rule out intracranial invasion. Optic neuritis, intracranial element, camera sinus thrombosis already described that initially in my presentation. And when you do a KOH bond, KOH staining and microscopy, direct microscopy using a fluorescent brightener and histopathology special stains like PAS and GMS staining. The typical finding, once again, it's aseptate or quasi-septate. I won't agree this. It is totally classically a non-septate, ribbon-like hyphae. Very important. Ribbon-like hyphae along with the vessel occlusion. Diagnosis confirmed that it's a mucor. So fungal culture, routine media at 30 degrees Celsius and 31 degrees Celsius. Typical finding, you get a cotton white or grayish black colonies, classically described as lid lifters. So what are the samples you can collect for this patient? If you suspect rhino-orbitocerebral mucormycosis, you can do a scraping or exudate from the nares. Heart parietal lesion, you can take a sample. Sinus material you can take, and you can take biopsy from the expected to socket area or endoscopic collection of the blood tissue and biopsy. Nasal dry swabs are not accepted. So swabs and secretions are often a poor quality specimen when compared to biopsy. And when you suspect a cutaneous mucormycosis, aspirations collected from sterile needle and syringe from undrained abscess, first expressed from abscess open to the scalpel, transferred to the laboratory either in a sterile container syringe, needle tissue, sterile syringe and needle tissue should be collected from both center and injection. Very important. You should not collect only for the center because in mucormycosis, classically you see the eschar, you see the complete necrosis. In the necrotic area, you may miss the, other classical histopathological findings. You may miss the classical angioinvasion at all. You will have only a necrotic tissue. Nothing can be seen as the tissue is not viable. So that's why you take a sample from the center and also the edge for the lesion. And pulmonary, as I already described, you do a wash, you do a biopsy, you do a sputum examination. Often sputum and saliva considered as poor quality specimens. GI, you could do an endoscopic biopsy, and renal, you could do a biopsy. The lesions are the image guidance. So let's come to the treatment. What do you do when you diagnose this patient? So first and foremost important thing is that timely diagnosis. Don't delay the diagnosis. If you pick up early, the chance of survival is good. The reversal of underlying predisposing factors. A lot of predisposing factors I have described. The most important predisposing factor is immunosuppression. You could reduce the duration of immunosuppression. You could reduce the amount of immunosuppression. Definitely, you can save the patient from invasive mucormycosis. Early and broad spectrum antifungal, as I already described, or early and broad surgical debridement of infected tissue. Definitely, invasive mucormycosis surgery plays a major role because that gives a good disease clearance when compared to the antifungal therapy. You can ask for questions, sir, why not antifungal therapy? So, this antifungal therapy, we don't know how much is the viability, how much is the concentration of this antifungal drugs reaching to the target site. And as the tissue, because there is an extensive necrosis, that's a dead tissue. Whatever you do through injection or any form, the target concentration reaching the necrotic area is far less. So often it is better to initially get a good surgical debridement. So what do you do? Possible or proven ROCM, urgent surgical debridement with strict glycemic control. These are the armamentarium we are having. We can start with injection amphotericin B 1 to 1.5 milligram per kilogram per day. Or you can start with liposomal amphotericin B by 10 mg per kg. Intracranial involvement, you can just increase the dose up to 10 mg per kg per day. Or you can use amphotericin B lipid complex 5 mg per kg per day. So among these three, whichever is available, you can use. But I prefer, liposomal amphotericin B because even though it is somewhat costly, the risk of nephrotoxicity and other electrolyte imbalance is far less when compared to conventional amphotericin B and amphotericin B lipid complex. And of course, even in liposomal amphotericin B, also in marginal kidney patients, definitely you may get a nephrotoxicity, but you need to monitor the patient after giving the amphotericin B. Continue the treatment till resolution of initial indicative findings on imaging and reconstitution of post-immune system. That's what I told you. Until you reverse the cause for immunosuppression, until you make a good control, definitely we need to continue all our treatment options. The second option, other than amphotericin choice, the second option is azole derivatives. This azole derivatives is posaconazole. It's not a very good drug. It's a broad spectrum azole available in both parenteral oral formulation. As far as my knowledge is concerned, I have used only suspension form. 200 milligram 4 times a day, 4 times per day. Alternately, for the these tablets are I am not seeing this type of these tablets. These tablets, 300 milligram every 12 hours on first day, then 300 milligram once daily taken with food. Actually, the problem with Posaconazole is that it has a variable viability. That's the problem with Posaconazole. That's why you can't start this drug as the initial mode of therapy for infectious. Definitely, drug of choice is, of course, amphotericin B and surgical resistance. This is the treatment of that for invasive mucormycosis. There is one more class of that is isavuconazole. This isavuconazole is a new azole derivative which acts on both invasive aspergillosis and invasive mucormycosis. This is one of the azole derivative which has a very good action on both invasive fungal infections, because for invasive aspergillosis treatment the choice is different, for invasive mucormycosis treatment is different. Invasive aspergillosis often we prefer as azole only, often we prefer voriconazole, whereas voriconazole can aggravate the worsening of invasive mucormycosis that we need to think in mind before starting the therapy. So these are the available drugs we are having: conventional amphotericin B, liposomal amphotericin B, amphotericin lipid complex, direct inflation of amphotericin B directly by image guidance, Posaconazole as I described. If nothing is available, you can go ahead with the combination therapy. You can go ahead with caspofungin along with the lipid complex. But duration is, it's highly depends upon the treating decision and depends upon the response. It's highly individualized. These are the different formulations. The mucor, emission to pill. This is very difficult mission, and use all the possible drugs, to attack the fungus and remove the devitalized tissue with the help of surgeon. That's very important. And here you could see that the same point as I mentioned. The bioavailability is a big question with azole derivative, particularly Posaconazole. Isavuconazole sulfate is it's a water-soluble prodrug which is a quickly addressed triazole after oral intravenous administration. High bioavailability and broad antispectrum activity. It has a less adverse effects. Combination therapy mainly used in CNS cases. So these are some of the popular brands available. You could see the suspension of Posaconazole, and you could see the liposomal amphotericin B, and you could see this isavuconazole sulfate. So these are some practical considerations. I have just made some few slides after that we'll end. So amphotericin B, how do you administer? What are the dosing protocols we need to follow? So if you are taking a conventional amphotericin B, or if you are taking a liposomal amphotericin B, the dose is 1 to 1.5 milligram per kilogram per day. Or if you are using liposomal, little bit 5 to 10 mg per kilogram per day. So duration 14 to 21 days, depending upon the severity or till the clinical resolution or radiological resolution. After 14 days, always better to shift the patient to oral Posaconazole, because the side effects with amphotericin liposomal acts on when you prolong the therapy. So basically, after 2 weeks to 20 days, it's better always to shift to safer one, that is the Posaconazole when compared to the amphotericin B. So this is a chart that you need to maintain. So you need to maintain the name of the drug, and you need to see the urea creatinine alternatives. You need to see the electrolytes. Very, very important is hypokalemia. Recurrent hypokalemia is a common issue when you use amphotericin B. Often we use injectable or supplements of potassium, and depending upon the patient's potassium level. And when you use this liposomal amphotericin B, how do you dilute it? So injection liposomal amphotericin B1 vial is around 50 milligram to be diluted in 12 ml of diluent. So this is for test dose. All these injections have to be given after test dose, because immediate anaphylaxis there are some sporadic reports of sudden death after using this. So definitely test dose is needed. Injection liposomal amphotericin B vial 50 milligram to be diluted in 12 ml of diluent, and from that only 0.25 ml, that is 1 mg of solution is made to be mixed with 100 ml of dextrose, and it has to be infused in 30 minutes. After 30 minutes, just observe for any reactions or any fever which is. If nothing is there, then you need to hydrate the patient to avoid a serious toxicity. 500 ml of NS over 30 minutes and has to be given, and 30 minutes. And therapeutic dose, as already described, that 5 milligram to 10 milligram per kilogram per day has to be given. That is of amphotericin B with 500 ml of D5 with 10 units of regular insulin over 3 hours. So this has to be followed for all the patients with the therapeutic dose who needs a therapeutic dose for invasive sarcoidosis. Post, even after injection also, you need to hydrate once again to avoid toxicity. So 500 ml over the next 30 minutes. So post-dose, definitely KFT with serum alcohols after every dose of amphotericin B to avoid complications. You need to note all these things in the amphotericin monitoring chart. So this is that is for liposomal. This is for conventional. So same thing. You need to see that we need to give a test dose. How we have to give 1 mg in 100 ml of D5 over 20 minutes. Watch for reaction. Nothing is there. Then once again do a hydration protocol like 500 ml of penicillin over 30 minutes. Then you have to use a therapeutic dose 1 to 1.5 milligram per kilogram per day amphotericin B in 500 ml of D5 with 10 units of regular insulin, human insulin, over 3 hours. After that, also you give 1 point of NS for 30 minutes. You monitor urine output, you monitor the renal function test, you monitor the blood urea and creatinine electrolytes, and once again you fill the amphotericin monitoring chart. This is the other formulation, that's the lipid complex. I don't have any personal experience with the lipid complex. I use conventional and use the liposomal. So once again, protocol. You need to give test dose 1 mg in 100 ml of D5 over 20 minutes. After that, you have to hydrate the patient 500 ml of NS over 30 minutes. Then you have to give a therapeutic dose 5 milligram per kilogram per day of amphotericin B in 500 ml of D5 along with insulin, 10 units of human regular insulin over 3 hours. And after the injection also, to avoid toxicity, you once again hydrate the patient by giving NS over 30 minutes. Then once again you monitor the KFT, urea creatinine, and serum electrolytes after every dose of amphotericin B, and then you fill the chart and daily you monitor the patient. As I already stressed on, surgical debridement is a very, very important treatment modality that we need to follow for all the patients if it is feasible. The mucormycosis is a highly angioinvasive infection, extensive thrombosis and tissue necrosis. Hence, antifungal agents display poor penetration to the site of infection. The surgical debridement with antifungal therapy has shown to improve the survival in all these patients. In case of pulmonary mucormycosis, you can prefer lobectomy or you can prefer pneumonectomy for the patients who got extensive disease. Similarly, for other organ-specific things, you can do surgery based on the specialties. And adjuvant therapies, there are some therapies you can just give. You need to reverse the immunosuppression. Very, very important. That I told already. So if the patient is having poorly controlled diabetes, make the sugar level under adequate control. And don't endlessly use the immunosuppressives, reduce the dose of these immunosuppressives, and reduce the duration of immunosuppressives. Patient, hypertonic oxygen, interferon gamma, and GM-CSF can be given. Avoid using chelators, and there are some studies of lovastatin and statins which can help, which can augment therapeutic efficacy of some antifungals. This was the spotlight of isavuconazole in the treatment of image of mucormycosis. So isavuconazole is a very good measure. This is not available here. Is concerned. I am not using isavuconazole. Can be given for fungal infection, both for aspergillus and mucor, as a very good response. So ultimately, what is more important is that disease we need to prevent it. And what we have to do, environmental cleanliness, to have no exposure to decaying organic matters like breads, fruits, vegetables, soil, compost, and excreta. We need to control the sugar level. Before is also important. Optimal steroid usage. That's the right timing of initiation, right dose, and right duration. I could see there are some prescriptions, even by doctors, for COVID-19 treatment. They're starting steroids from day one. Actually, it is detrimental because day one, there is a period of viremia. If you use steroids, there is a chance of proliferation of a virus at the time of initial phase, and you got a prolonged viremia, and you have a high risk of developing cytokine cytokine stimulation, inflammatory storm. That's why steroids should not be given in the initial phase. At the timing of initial is a very important dose. You should not give a generously high dose. At first, high dose, just 40 milligram BD for methylprednisolone in a moderate case. That's enough. I could see 125 milligram, 1 gram. That is absolutely not needed for patients with COVID-19 pneumonia, even in moderate severe cases. Right duration and right time. That's very important. And use clean distilled water for humidifiers during oxygen therapy. Definitely, this point has to be noted. And use antibiotics and antifungals one and only when indicated. Because I could say generous prescription of antifungal just to avoid this mucor. Actually, that should not be done. Actually, that will increase the risk of toxicity with multiple drugs. That will increase the risk of developing other infections. Do not consider all the cases of blocked nose as a case of invasive mucor, because blocked nose is very common. It may be because allergic rhinitis, and as we are seeing, many cases of bacterial sinusitis also there, particularly in the context of immunosuppression and COVID-19 patients and immunomodulators. There is high chance of developing bacterial sinusitis, so that has to be seen. The other simple test you can do is that you can see the pupillary reaction, you can see the ocular mobility at a distance, you can look for sinus tenderness and palatal examination. Should be a part of routine physical examination of a COVID patient after recovery. This is my last slide. What are the recommendations for humidifiers? This is the point I want to stress, because I think in North India, like you could see a surge of mucormycosis, a lot of cases. I could see a lot of reports in the journals and newspapers and all. All this is because of the overuse of oxygen, and these people are using oxygen on the roadside, and because situations like that, always use distilled or sterile water. Never use unboiled tap water or nor mineral water. Fill up to about 10 mm below the maximum fill line. Do not allow this thing to spill out. Do not let the water level pass below the maximum fill line. Water level should be checked twice daily and topped up when required. Water in the humidifier should be changed daily, and humidifier should be washed with the mild soapy water, rinsed with the clean water, dried in air before reuse. Once a week for the same patient, and in between the patients, all the components of the humidifier should be soaked in mild aseptic solution for 30 minutes and should be rinsed with the clean water and dried in air. So my point for all of you is that the take-home message for this today's CME is that mucormycosis is such a terrible disease, it's a bad disease. It has high morbidity and mortality. So once you are not picking up early, definitely you are going to lose a patient. Mucormycosis should be considered as a differential diagnosis for any cavity lung disease in the lung, particularly when you are seeing the patient in the post-COVID scenario, and to prevent delays in the treatment and improve the likelihood of survival. Early diagnosis is imperative. The most important thing is that remove the devasculation tissue, remove the necrotic tissue, remove the source of infection. So that's the thing. Early surgical debridement is very important, but it's feasible in the feasible area. And amputation and antifungal therapy or considered as a standard of treatment. And the point that I could see in the newspapers is that black fungus. Actually, it should not be called as a black fungus, because black fungus is a misnomer. Mucormycosis and mucor is not a black fungus, because black fungus is a different family fungus which can produce melatonin and melanin pigments. Whereas this black fungus, I don't know how they got how they are telling this name to the mucormycosis, just because that it will cause a blackish discoloration of skin. I don't know like why they are calling it as a black fungus, but definitely it should not be called as a black fungus. Thanks one and all. If you have any doubt, I'm ready to clarify. Thank you so much.
Sir, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, sir. It was actually very informative to all of us.
Yeah, thank you.
Sir, I just had one doubt. I mean, I just read it somewhere, but I haven't found it anywhere online, or I haven't found any studies regarding it. Use of methylene blue in preventing the fungal infections. Anything like that, sir? Like, I don't know. I thought it is completely fake because I couldn't find any reports regarding that. It was some stupid image that has been forwarded many times by many people too. So they kept on asking me, what is it true? Is it true? Is it true? Like, is there any?
I told you nothing. Methylene blue, I don't know. Like, even for COVID pneumonia, also initially they were saying methylene blue. Because you know, COVID-19, I could see all the drugs have been tried. Even antipsychotic drugs tried, even antidepressant drugs tried. You know, you see the reports of melatonin, which is helpful in preventing the progression of COVID-19. I don't know whether it is a scientifically proven therapy or not. I could see a lot of reports in that. But you know, like I could only tell you that whatever publications that occur in the time of COVID era, you should not completely rely. You have to see the studies, how they have done, and how many subjects are there, whether they have done the study properly and all. Regarding your question, the same image I have seen one doctor has used this, in the humidifier oxygen cylinder, near the oxygen cylinder. He filled instead of that, he filled the methylene blue. I don't know, there is no confirmatory evidence or reports on that. You have to follow the same protocol, whatever I have described initially. Follow the humidifier. So that is enough to prevent disease. Use this immunosuppressive agents. You should not over immunosuppressive agents. I could see just by seeing the CRP reports, these people are adding under 6 CRP. As a pulmonologist, I think you agree with me that a lung that got damaged with the ARDS, you can't reverse the, changes in a single day. Just
Yes,
by
sir.
taking
Yes.
short of steroid, you can't expect the patient to sit up with a good saturation of 90 days. Okay.
Yeah.
What
Yes,
you have to do is that the patient should not worsen. You have to maintain the lung like that without causing further damage.
yes,
That's
sir.
our aim. So that's the thing
Sure.
that we follow.
Okay. And sir, one more thing that I wanted to ask you was, sir, like right now, the amphotericin B, posaconazole, or itraconazole, we have been trying it for the last 1 week.
Yeah.
We haven't found any dealers anywhere, even though we want around 200 to 300, 400 doses. So we haven't. Is there any caspofungin in mucosa, sir?
Yes. That's what I told you. Like, see, actually,
ఫంగస్ వచ్చింది కదా దాని గురించి చెప్తున్నారు ప్లస్
because see, we have a lot of experience with amphotericin B, and it's a very good drug. It's a wonder drug for mucus. Even actually, I'm telling you, even with the amphotericin B also, even the drug therapy is not important. You need to control the primary disease. You need to control the immunosuppression. Along with that, you need to debride the tissue with the help of surgeon. All these three is very important. Just by giving amphotericin, we lost a lot of patients. Even after using all these things, the mortality is very high with invasive mucus. As you correctly asked, even in my presentation also, I just told caspofungin also can be used because but you should not use that alone. That's what I'm telling you. Caspofungin acts very well against Aspergillus. Caspofungin is considered as a salvage therapy secondary to the this voriconazole and all. Okay, first choice is voriconazole. We can use amphotericin. Then comes caspofungin. So caspofungin should not be tried as a first therapy. For example, if the patient after putting voriconazole develops some side effects, or the patient after putting amphotericin develops some serious side effects, where we can't continue the antifungal therapy,
Hello?
that situation we can use.
Sir?
You are hearing?
Now I'm able to hear you.
No, you're not hearing?
I'm able to hear you now, sir. In between, it just got
okay.
a while.
Once again, I'm repeating. Caspofungin
Yes.
we can use, but caspofungin alone is not ideally recommended for mucus because in case of vulnerability, definitely amphotericin is the drug of choice. It's one of that I won't tell you as a drug of choice because this is not the one wonder drug that can reverse the scenario in invasive mucus. You can try amphotericin in any form along with surgical debridement. That's the first treatment of choice. If that is not available, you can go with caspofungin, but caspofungin acts very well against invasive aspergillosis, not with mucus. You can try caspofungin along with some other antifungal which works against mucus. Maybe if it is not available, you can use caspofungin along with some azole. Maybe posaconazole that we described. I think it is available. Posaconazole is available. So we can use posaconazole. But once again, posaconazole is available in suspension form. I don't know like how far it will reach the blood, how far it will reach the target tissue. Even with injection also, how much drug will reach the target tissue, we don't know. So it's a big query. And the duration, actually, some of the participants are asking duration.
Yes.
Actually, I'll tell you the scenario. Like for invasive aspergillosis, recently I managed just before the COVID scenario. For that patient, I gave amphotericin for almost like 20 days, 15 to 20 days. And after clinical response, I changed to other drugs. And then I continued up to 1 month or 1.5 months. Because, invasive aspergillosis, 14 to 21 days. For mucus, 14 to 21 days is the ideal scenario of what they have described. Even in today's AIMS recommendation also, they have recommended 3 to 4 weeks. But, for invasive fungal infections, nobody can tell you the correct duration of therapy. It depends upon the patient's clinical response. You can just extend the duration. There are some reports that these people have given antifungals for more than 8 weeks also. But only thing, you choose a safe drug, avoid toxic drug for long duration. That's what I told you. Initially, you can use amphotericin for 2 weeks because after 2 weeks, definitely you will have a recurrent hypokalemia. I could see, I have seen a lot of patients after using amphotericin for 2 weeks, they were coming with potassium of 1, 1.2 regularly.
Oh my God.
Regularly we need to correct that. So that is also one of the challenging scenarios that we face.
Okay. Anybody have any more doubts regarding mycosis, regarding COVID, regarding any management of COVID? Or is the mucoadenosis and diabetes immunosuppression only? And someone
one more good query that was in the chat box. Like, sir, is the mucus due to steroids? and diabetes immunosuppression only. And by chance being in COVID or COVID as a role in patient. See, actually this is a very good query. So we don't know. I have seen some patients who are non-diabetic, but after the COVID, post-COVID, they are coming up with frequent urination. When you see the sugar level, it's about 300. We don't know whether these people are pre-diabetic patients. After pushing up the steroids and all these things, these patients are turned out to be diabetes, or COVID itself, whether it leads to the glucose intolerance or so what I could see is that COVID is an acute stress. Any COVID pneumonia is acute stress. It's like a treadmill test. Okay, so pancreas can withstand some amount of stress only. The COVID is a stress. You are pushing up steroids. You are pushing up immunosuppressants. How far it will respond? At one point of time, the surge of insulin for that glucose will be reduced, and they may turn on to the diabetes. So we don't have a direct proof that this COVID virus affects islets and damages islets, but definitely there is a complex interaction. But I could say in COVID pneumonia, presence of diabetes, uncontrolled diabetes is definitely a very big issue, and we need to monitor that.
Yes.
Dr. Yuvarajan.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Vishwanathan here.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Just till about 2 editions ago, yes, Harrison has said dogmatically that azoles are not recommended for the treatment of mucormycosis.
Yes,
but now, till the advent of posaconazole and isavuconazole.
Yes,
so these are the only 2 drugs because probably they wanted to take care of aspergillus. Because aspergillus, you give voriconazole and itraconazole. Yes, so you have to primarily differentiate that. Yes, and other than that galactomannan, usually they say more than 10 nodules, presence of pleural effusion and presence of sinusitis, they go in favor of aspergillus. So in that case, you have to give voriconazole. And voriconazole prophylaxis itself may lead on to mucormycosis. That's what they say.
Yes, sir. That's what, sir. Initially, in my presentation, I told that you should not generously use the azole because azole can aggravate the scenario of mucus. You should not unnecessarily use it. Even as sir was pointing out, posaconazole alone may not do a magic in mucus.
Yeah.
Always it's adjuvant therapy only. Secondary to this amphotericin is adjuvant therapy. There are a lot of reports that using voriconazole wrongly for the patient with invasive mucormycosis definitely will worsen the scenario and lead to the morbidity and mortality. And this in case of complex infections, like having both we have a doubt of invasive aspergillosis and we have a doubt of invasive mucormycosis. There are some reports are there. There are some patients who got invasive mucor and aspergillosis. If there is a doubt or there is in this type of scenario, that's the point that isavuconazole, I don't know, it is not available in India. This isavuconazole is one of the azole that is, it can act both on this aspergillus and mucus.
Sir, hello, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Sir, is it rational to start prophylaxis for mucus antifungal?
No.
Having
No. That should not be done. That's what I'm telling you. Even though we are seeing some cases of mucus, still it is somewhat rare only. Okay. I'm telling you, the whole lifetime, like you see, it's not so common. Okay. So maybe in COVID, you are seeing reports here and there, and I don't advise to give prophylaxis for mucus. Don't advise. So instead, what you do, instead of giving prophylaxis, you avoid the infection of mucus, you regularly monitor the patient, you check the humidifiers, whatever protocol I have told. You just avoid immunosuppressives, you avoid immunomodulators, don't give that immunomodulators for long duration. You control the COVID disease with the standard protocol. This will address the scenario when compared to other things. I won't advise, definitely.
Even though the patient has underlying hemochromatosis or who is on iron chelator therapy or cancer chemotherapy, even though that patient may not need prophylaxis antifungals.
That's what. See, prophylaxis of antifungal actually is very well used for post-transplant patients, particularly for post-lung transplant, bone marrow transplants and all. The risk of invasive fungal infections based on the timeline is very high. So in that group of patients, you can afford to use, but I don't think for this, because even not all the patients with iron overload, not all the patients with this will develop mucormycosis. So I don't think prophylaxis, there's a typical guidelines which is recommending to give prophylaxis.
Thank you, sir.
So it's a difficult disease to get. That's what I'm doing. It's a difficult disease to get. Once it comes to you, it's difficult disease to treat. That's what I want to tell you.
Much, sir.
Sir, another question. Is there any uniqueness to the...
Your voice is breaking, Karthik. Can you just... I think your signal is not good.
Sir, is there any unique feature for the pleural effusion in mucormycosis, sir?
Yes.
Uniquely,
yes,
how to
yes.
suspect?
Yes. That's a very good question. Actually, invasive fungal infections can lead to pleural effusion, can either in form of invasive acidosis and mucor. The pleural effusion, nothing special in that. Only thing is that it is a empyema. It won't involve the pleura directly. It is most certainly to be a contiguous spread. So what image I have shown in my presentation, you could have seen, whole of the right lung is completely turned out to be a necrotic tissue. Okay, actually I have not shown the video. Actually, this video was presented by one of my assistants in the international conference. Actually, we have done a bronchoscopy for that case, that right necrotic tissue. So when I entered into the bronchus, okay, I was totally shocked that right bronchus is totally fractured, man. Right bronchus is totally fractured. Right main bronchus, near just branching for the right upper lobe bronchus, totally fractured. I asked my assistant, you go inside and see. There is a hole was there. He went inside. We saw pleura in there. So such a terrible disease. So what I want to tell is that this empyema, it produces empyema, it produces effusion. There is nothing different or no special features. You may have increased incidence of pus formation with this group of diseases, invasive fungal infections. And when you have a doubt, you should definitely ask for a KOH.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Sir, one question, sir. Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon, please.
Sir, is there a critical cutoff point for the duration of steroids in COVID, sir, in order to prevent the emergence of such conditions in immunocompromised patients, sir? Like the diabetes patient who is a known diabetic, is there a critical cutoff point for the duration of steroids, sir?
Yeah, that's what already we are explaining that only, sir. Because as COVID, based on the timeline, if you treat a COVID, it's very simple to treat. But this is because of poor management. Maybe the disease may be a virulent one, but see, if you see the timeline properly, you can assess the complication early. You can predict the complication. You can treat it early. So people are coming very late to us in the oxygen requirement form. They have damaged lung. So definitely they should pay for it, yeah, because they are coming on 10th day, man, 10th or 11th day. So what I am just telling is that the inflammatory phase after a viremia, that phase actually can be controlled with your own body, or when there is an overt inflammation, you need to put on the anti-inflammatory drug to control that inflammation. Otherwise, your tissue will be damaged. So the next question is that how long this inflammation will be there? It depends upon the hope. It depends upon the duration of viremia. Okay, so what are the causes of prolonged viremia? That's what I told you. Any patient with the immunocompromised status, diabetes mellitus and all, they will have prolonged viremia. So those patients with prolonged viremia, they will have prolonged host inflammatory response. I'm not telling cytokine storm. I'm telling prolonged inflammatory response. Second thing, any patient who have started steroids from day 1 or day 2, this is the thing that we don't want. Okay, so they are giving steroids, and exactly at the 7th day where we see complications. At that time, they are stopping the steroids.
Yes, sir. Understand.
So that's the thing. So what I'm just telling is that in patients with a moderate disease, not more than 5 to 7 days, but definitely not more than 10 days, I could tell. Any steroid. And the dose also, you should use a conserved dose. Don't give high dose. That's what I told you. If you are preferring oral therapy, the steroids is enough. Maybe DEXA as per the trial, as per the recovery trial, DEXA 6 mg or the 8 mg of DEXA per day for 5 to 7 days, or if you are using methylprednisolone 50 mg per day for 7 days, or if you are using injectable in the hospital, not more than 7 days. You can ask the question, sir. Patient is having hypoxemia. Can you steroids? See, hypoxemia cannot be reversed with steroids. Okay. So you support the patient initially in inflammatory phase. So healing and all, our body will take care. Why we need to worry?
Yes, sir.
You push steroids so much for long duration, it will not problem.
Okay, sir.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sir, somebody put up a message, like
Yeah.
Dr. Naima says, mycosis, pulmonary mycosis is BAL necessary to fungal load with lipoampho.
Yes, actually, as we have see, actually, if you are using BAL, you can very well do a biopsy. Why I'm telling, because you know this tissue won't bleed that much. You know, I told you I have seen 2-3 patients with pulmonary mycosis where bronchoscopy was done. So in that you see the necrotic tissue, you can easily do a biopsy. Not much of problem. So as I initially pointed out that secretions and this are always preferred as a second specimen and compared to biopsy. If possible, do a biopsy. But BAL is a good specimen because you are taking directly from the lower respiratory tract. Okay, so BAL is a good specimen. BAL shows mucormycosis, you can take it as a specimen. If there is no chance of doing biopsy, but always prefer to do biopsy along with BAL. Is there any role of amphibolic stabilization along with IVD? Yes. But we don't know. You know, these are the drugs. There are many drugs have been used in nebulization. We have tried nebulization with Lasix. We have tried nebulization with antibiotics and all. We don't know how far it will reach the lung. But I told you, this mucor is not a disease that is restricted only to the airways. I'm just clarifying it. And giving a drug through the airway is not a good route for you to reach a sufficient concentration for any disease which is invasive. I'm telling you this fact. Any disease which is invasive, don't depend on any drug that is delivered to airway. So even for communicable pneumonia also, many people suggest inhaled tobramycin. See, inhaled tobramycin can add on to the therapy, but don't depend on that. We need to give some other drug, so IV or something like that. So to check on that before giving this inhalation form. We don't know how much it is bioavailable and how much is it.
Thank you so much for sir.
Yeah.
Sir, small doubt out
Yeah.
of mucormycosis.
Yeah, no.
Regarding the post fibrosis, like people almost like 30 days of NIV, or some people required like 50 days of NIV and able to wean them off.
Yeah.
Is it rational to use isotretinoin or nintedanib these people, sir?
Okay. This point is
the preferred drug, sir.
This is a very nice point. I should clarify that because these are the two antifibrotic drugs. Actually, this should be restricted to those patients who have aberrant wound healing. This point is very important. Aberrant healing of tissues, because it's like keloid only, man. Okay. See, not all the tissue which gets injured will get a scar. Do you agree with me? Because a lot of so we don't see this will go without complications. Okay, but there are some tissue which can give a big scar, which can give a more amount of fibrosis, which can give an enormous fibroblastic response. Among that disease, number one is idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. Number two is CVD related ILD. So these two diseases definitely we can use because the wound healing is apparent, more fibroblast deposition is there. But COVID-19 pneumonia, it is like a regular pneumonia. You don't see exorbitant or enormous fibroblastic proliferation in any of these patients. So most of the cases will do very well after a short course of steroids with supportive therapy. When you do a CT on follow-up, definitely all these fibrosis will go up. But definitely there is some role. I'll just tell you. There is a marginal role of antibiotics in all these patients. As you correctly pointed out that those patients who have hypoxemia and have a prolonged phase of therapy in ICU for what? Okay, those patients are having cough. And those patients who have an extensive interstitial disease with peribronchial thickening and all. You can give a short course of antifibrotic and harm it. Giving that.
Sir, thank you so much. And it was really a talk and very informative for all of people in Andhra Pradesh, in our district. And actually to everybody, sir is this in his MD after, so he's very good and he's informative and always help. And I really thank you so much for joining us today. I also thank Superintendent from GGH for joining nodal officers who have. And I think it's time for us to close the because there's another will be happening in minutes. Thank you so much for joining and all your experience. And if can you please send us your sir.
Yes. We can just, I will just share you the mail. You can share to us. No problem.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Can you just close, sir?
Yeah.
You are the host.
Yeah.